Gray area drinking, what it means is essentially sort of what it sounds like. It's not just a black and white sort of thing. We tend to see alcoholism in this binary. Either you are an alcoholic or you aren't. But when I started to struggle, I just didn't see anything that sort of named where I was at. When I started to try to talk to people, people just were super attached to how much I drank. That was always the first question. Well, how much are you drinking? And I'd be like, a glass or two of wine a day. And they'd be like, that's not a problem. And I'd be like, but it's a problem for me. And I think about this all the time. Like, it's hijacked my mind.
Hi, everyone. I'm Talia. Welcome to Tales of Triumph, the Love Medals podcast, where we celebrate courage, resilience, and love in the face of life's challenges. If you enjoy this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue to bring these meaningful stories to you. Let's dive into this inspiring conversation. Please enjoy. Hi, Madeleine. Thank you for being our guest. I'm very interested in our conversation today because we're going to be talking about something that's a hidden type of adversity and something that I imagine is quite common and generally flies under the radar. And that's something that's being called gray area addiction. So I'm very hopeful that this will be eye-opening for people and that it'll help start conversations, important conversations, not just with themselves, but also with the people that they love and care about. So thank you for being here.
Oh, Talia, it's my absolute pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So can you start by sharing a bit about your background in business and what had you shift towards becoming more of a writer with a special interest in gray area addiction?
I grew up here on the West Coast on the unceded stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I guess I always had a bit of a rebellious streak when I was growing up. When it came to choosing a career, I ended up becoming an entrepreneur, which I think is actually really well suited. I don't really love conformity and authority and things like that. I just have a strong sense of social justice. I came of age as a feminist as a teenager, and so that perspective has very much informed everything, my belief system. I decided to become a social entrepreneur because essentially the task of a social entrepreneur is to create business structures that support social change. I became interested in that in my sort of early to mid-20s and started my first venture, which was dedicated to reusable menstrual products. It was called Luna Pads, and we made cloth pads and period underwear and sold menstrual cups. And so essentially anything reusable to manage periods, but more importantly, like really taking a stand for what's now called menstrual equity, the idea that people who menstruate should have free access to products and should be free of social shame and stigma. And shame and stigma, I know, is going to be a big topic for us later. And yeah. And so, I went through that. But I have a degree. I have a double major. One of those was gender studies. And also the second one was in English literature. So I've always had a huge love of reading and writing. But I didn't come to identify as a writer until relatively recently. I published a book in 2021, which is right here.
Yes, The Greater Good. Amazing. Yes.
Yay. And so that's essentially a bit of a memoir of my career as a social entrepreneur, but also as a how-to guide. And it also captures the stories of dozens of other social entrepreneurs. Yeah, and now I write a lot of long-form essays, mostly about addiction, sobriety, and recovery, but about a few other things too.
Got it.
Yeah.
And obviously, that's because you've had personal experience in that area. Do you mind explaining more about what gray area addiction is and how does it differ from more extreme alcohol use?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So when I grew up, like many people, I believed that alcohol was just a normal part of life. Like it was, every celebration or, maybe if you'd had a bad day or you were trying to find some liquid courage. I literally would not have been able to imagine something like, say, a wedding or a date or that type of an engagement, girls' night out, that type of thing without alcohol. It was just sort of like normative, right? I knew that if you drank too much, you became this thing called an alcoholic. And that was never really redefined to me. It was definitely something that I internalized was a really bad thing to be. Like, it was essentially your choice and your problem and your fault, because if you became an alcoholic, it was because you lacked self-control or didn't sufficiently, respect the well-being of your family, or couldn't solve your problems in a more healthy way. So there was this energy of like, you don't want to be that kind of person.
Yeah.
And because it's a bad thing to be, and it's messy and you mess up other people's lives and so on. Gray area drinking, what it means is essentially sort of what it sounds like. It's not just a black and white sort of thing. We tend to see alcoholism in this binary, like either you are an alcoholic or you aren't. And there is some kind of like, you've crossed some kind of line. My experience was not that at all. And I think that there's this huge terrain of drinking and behavior. And in my case, I'm just here to talk about drinking and about gray area drinking, because again, I have experience with some of it and I do not have experience with other parts of it. But when I started to struggle, I just didn't see anything that sort of named where I was at. Like, when I started to try to talk to people, I would basically have people tell me that I was not an alcoholic, even to get to the point where I would be able to say to someone, I don't like how I think about alcohol. Like, that was the thing. Like, people just were super attached to how much I drank. Like, that was always the first question. Well, how much are you drinking? And I'd be like, a glass or two of wine a day. And they'd be like, that's not a problem. And I'd be like, but it's a problem for me. And I think about this all the time. Like, it's hijacked my mind. I always knew how much wine was in the house. I never ran out. I would find myself anticipating that, glass or two plus of wine a night. Yeah, it just took up a disproportionate amount of what I call mental real estate. And I just didn't see any conversations about that as I looked into it further and started to learn. I didn't even know what alcohol was, right? It was just wine. And wine is this nice, happy thing. It's a mark of sophistication, right? The more I started to learn about alcohol, because I actually got interested in it, because they don't tell you what it is. Like, there's no real, there's no labels on it the way there are nutritional labels that have to tell you what's in a product.
Yeah. Alcohol is just alcohol. So there's an important distinction between how you define this for yourself. It's not necessarily about how much you drink. It's more about your relationship to it, how much time you're thinking about it, how much you're depending on it. So it's more about that as opposed to the quantity or the frequency.
That was my experience, and 100%. And a further sort of nuance on that is that when we're thinking about whether someone has a drinking quote unquote problem, what we mean is, are they addicted to alcohol or not? And one of the things that I've learned is that alcohol is a really toxic substance. It's a carcinogen, which means that it causes cancer. And there's no safe level of it to consume from a health perspective. So whether or not you are an addict, like, obviously that's a very distinct, important thing that you want to address. But well before you get to that place, alcohol is doing so much harm to people's health. And yet we keep insisting that the problem only comes when someone's addicted to it. And I think that's a huge problem.
Just so people understand, what is alcohol and what are some of the proven health issues that are associated with regular alcohol consumption? And you just brought up one of them, is it's a carcinogen. I think I read that it's classified in the same category as like asbestos.
Yeah, and tobacco. So cigarettes. It's a level 1 carcinogen. The technical name for it is ethanol. And when I learned that, I was like, ethanol, where have I seen that before? And it's at the gas station. Like, it's an ingredient in gasoline. Yeah, it's a chemical that's used to disinfect things, which also tells you something really important, right? You're ingesting something that is used as an additive to gasoline that literally kills life. When an old movie, they're like, oh, we don't have any disinfectant, grab a bottle of vodka or whatever. And like, that's why, because it kills germs and bacteria. So it is also killing your gut bacteria. So it causes 7 different types of cancer, including breast cancer.
Ooh.
And it causes heart disease. I think it's associated with almost 200 different types of diseases. The other things it's associated with are things like violence, domestic violence, suicide, It's present in a huge number of sexual assault situations, like just disproportionately, massively. And it's estimated that it's present in over 90% of all sexual assault cases that occur on university campuses. So it's the number one date rape drug. We're worried about roofies, which are to be worried about and are not a small
Yes.
problem. I don't mean to diminish that in any way. But it's
Absolutely.
like the drink that you're already drinking is part
Or an
of
issue.
the problem.
Yes. Wow. Okay, there's a lot there to take in because there's the normalization of it, which has been there since the beginning of time. I mean, even in like religious realms, right?
Yep.
And we're evolving, humanity is evolving, and it only makes sense that these kinds of things need to evolve as well. And alcohol is a serious thing. So, what do you feel are some of the contributing factors towards why people might overlook the seriousness of this issue?
Oh, well, the first place I would point is capitalism. Essentially, it's a multi-billion dollar industry, and it purchases the services of government lobbyists, and the government's making billions of dollars in tax revenue from the sales of alcohol. And so it's this really ugly, dirty, nasty thing. We need to treat alcohol the way that it went with cigarettes in the
Yes, got
1960s
it.
and 70s, where the research started coming out. And now you've seen things like the Canadian Centre for Substance and Addiction, their low risk drinking guidelines that came out in 2022 that said that low risk means no more than 2 drinks a week. And that was down from something like 7 for women and 14 for men. And so it's like this radical reduction. And I'm not saying safe, they say low risk. So there are literally, if you Google it, there are a number of massive studies that will tell you that there is literally no amount of alcohol is safe to consume for human health. Like nothing, zero. But I want to speak to people, and because this is true for me too. Like I use substances, I use caffeine, I use sugar, I use behaviors like shopping. And with respect to alcohol, it's been used ritually throughout history. People have wanted to escape their lives for just, this taking the edge off notion. I'm not coming down on that. Like, I understand that urge. It's about self-regulation of our nervous systems. And we can lead pretty stressful lives, as you know, right?
Yes.
And those days where you come home and you just like,
I just want to.
we're in it right now.
Wine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how do we just feel a bit better in that moment? And how do we access some form of comfort or distraction or whatever it is that we're seeking from alcohol?
Yes. Well, that is something I want to definitely talk about because there's obviously a much larger issue here that's at the core of all this. You mentioned the powers that be that are encouraging this, but there's also, do you feel societal pressure that plays into this as well?
I think so. I mean, we live in what's technically called an alcoholic culture. That means that it's conducive to alcohol consumption. Like it's just become so normalized and normative, so it's so pervasive in terms of marketing. Like I was reading a fashion magazine a few months ago, and out of the 14 pages, 9 of the pages were advertisements or editorial related to alcohol.
Wow.
I know. Like whether you're happy or you're sad or you're having fun, one of the ones that is pretty bad is wine o'clock. It's just this thing that you do.
Yeah.
And it's self-justifying just perfectly. Like it's the time of day when you pour yourself a glass of wine or, some other form of alcohol. And that is insidious because that's not a casual choice. Yes, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So what were some of the signs for yourself that drinking was becoming an unhealthy habit?
I was starting to definitely experience hangovers. And so also I'm in my mid 50s now. So I started really thinking about or recognizing that I had an issue, I'd say roughly 10 years ago. And I started to just feel more sluggish in the morning, and I would also wake up in the middle of the night. Menopause is something or perimenopause 10 years ago for me. I've been postmenopausal for about 4 or 5 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm excited about it. And we're going to talk about that later too. And so it was kind of this combination of my life being unsustainable. Like I would wake up with hot flashes at 5 a.m. So the way the cycle would go would be I'd have my wine in the evening and take the edge off, get a little bit numbed out, and then go to sleep, but then wake up in around 2 or 3 in the morning. And it would take me like a full 90 minutes at least to get back to sleep. And then I would get woken up an hour later with hot flashes. We're only just coming to understand how important sleep is for our health overall. Like we just think it's this thing that we do for a few hours every day and you just need to do it. But your brain is literally cleaning itself during that time. There are 4 main levels of sleep. And when you consume alcohol, you only do the first 2. And the really, really deep, the REM sleep is much harder to access when the body is detoxifying itself from alcohol. Because again, that's what happens when we ingest alcohol. It's a toxin because it's poison, essentially.
Yeah.
Our body, our liver, our immune system kind of goes, it's like a red alert. So anything else that the liver is doing to extract toxins, to process life, the environment for your body every day gets taken offline because it's like, I got to deal with the alcohol.
Right.
That's even one drink. It takes your immune system offline and your liver is like, okay, emergency, emergency. I'm going to deal with this now. And it stops doing everything else.
Wow. I'm sure that's going to be a shock for a lot of people to hear.
It took me years and years and years, like, to unlearn this alcohol culture and the beliefs that I had about it. I've read a dozen books on this subject. I've listened to dozens of podcasts. I don't know everything, but I now know the reality of what alcohol is, what it does, how our bodies metabolize it. And especially at being the age I was at, like, I'm not 25 where I can handle it. It was that combo of perimenopause that was just like, no, you can't do this anymore. There's no way.
Right. So what was that like for you embarking on those 2 journeys at the same time, your journey to sobriety and then also your journey into menopause? What was that like experiencing them at the same time?
It was powerful. It took me a long time, a lot of pain to get to that place of recognition that I am no longer under control in this situation. There's a wonderful person in the sobriety space these days called Laura McCowan. Says one of the key questions you need to ask yourself, it's not how many glasses you're drinking and it's not whatever substance, it's are you free?
Yes.
And I love the simplicity of that question. And I sort of tested myself for many years. I would do dry January. And then I did a 100-day challenge. And when I went back to alcohol after the 100-day challenge, that was the moment where I'm like, I'm not doing that anymore. Like, it's so obvious to me that I'm out of control. But to come back to the menopause thing, I really found a lot of power by drawing on the archetype in terms of the female life cycle. There's the maiden, the mother, the wise woman, and the crone. And so for me, recognizing that I was into my wise woman phase of this autumnal menopausal phase of life, it's not about going downhill. It's about liberating. Like, you are free in so many ways. I feel incredible. I feel like I've let go of so many things, really drawing on this idea of the wise woman to support me as I move through menopause, but also in sobriety, that she was really the one saying, like, if you're really going to be this thing now, this is how you do it. And you need to take care of yourself. And the number one way for you to take care of yourself right now is by not drinking.
Beautiful.
So I set myself free. I don't even feel like I quit drinking.
Yeah.
I feel like I liberated myself from alcohol. And that is such a powerful reframe.
Yes. Beautiful. I love that so much. I'm feeling into that. That's very cool. Yeah. So through that journey, can you share a moment when the struggle was most difficult for you and what you did to get through it?
The biggest struggle was telling people in the beginning, like just saying it out loud. That's been true in so many things in my life. Just naming it, just saying that I needed help and I needed to change and I didn't know how to do it. And that kind of moment of surrender, of helplessness. Classically, in a lot of conversations about alcoholism, you hear about rock bottom. And so meaning that there's some kind of really dramatic event. And that's what it looks like in movies and it's what it looks like in some people's lives. But in my case, that wasn't what it looked like. And it was this slow progression. For me, rock bottom was just when I told myself the truth. I am not free. This is controlling me, and it will keep controlling me unless I take a really drastic step to change it. It was definitely a struggle to tell people, but the more I did it, the easier it got.
Got it. How did you find most people showed up for you once you
Awesome.
started sharing? Okay, that's
Yeah,
great.
most people were really, really great. It sort of ranged from flat out disbelief or
Mm-hmm.
unwillingness to really listen to me and getting
Mm-hmm.
into the, well, how much is it, one glass or is it two glass? And I'm like, stop it with the number
Yeah.
of glasses. Like, just
Yeah.
stop. I've been doing this for years. And the point is that it's progressing. Like, alcohol use disorder, as it's called now, is
Mm-hmm.
progressive, right? It's building. So, and this goes back to the idea of the gray area drinking, which I don't think I ever really defined as being essentially anything that lies between very casual, oh, I might have a glass of a beer a month, just like
Mm-hmm.
really minimal, to people who are drinking habitually every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so typically drinking only goes one way. It only increases. There's this pattern of bit by bit
Got
by
it.
bit because your tolerance is going up, because your neural pathways, the amount of dopamine that is being released in the
Mm.
brain. There's a thing called a hedonic set point in the brain. Anyways, it means that you require more and more and more of the substance to achieve the kind of dopamine hit that you're looking for
Got it.
in your brain.
Yes.
Yeah, so I did that. And once I started speaking about it and writing about it, people went crazy.
Ooh, like in what ways?
Well, they
Like,
loved it. It was like, I'm
good.
posting this on LinkedIn, you know? Like,
Oh,
it
I
was
love
just
that.
wild. It was like this thing I never thought I would do. I didn't think I would tell anyone. But when I did, it was like this emperor has no clothes moment. It's like, I have nothing to
Amazing.
be ashamed of. I am a person who had the courage to admit that I had a problem and to ask for help and to do something about it and to take control of my life. And it just felt so good.
I love hearing that the response was generally positive and that people were really reacting well to it. How can friends and family support people who are dealing with gray area addiction in a way that is empowering rather than judgmental?
Yeah, well, I think one of the popular conceptions also about alcoholism is that it's a you problem, right? So
Mm,
when you're thinking, oh, well, this person's doing this, has this behavior, and I'm concerned, I always say or encourage people to look at themselves first. And not just with alcohol, but if you are a drinker, so called, pay attention to that. But it goes back to this taking the edge off thing. The conversation is really about how are we regulating our nervous systems and comforting ourselves in ways that are either healthy or maybe not so healthy.
yeah.
And so I really encourage people to do that deep dive in themselves first. And from that lens of not, am I drinking too much? Of like, how am I self soothing? How am I taking care of myself? What does that look like? And I don't think anybody gets a perfect score on that. Very few people do. And so, in other words, if you're coming into a conversation with someone and you want them to talk about how they are perhaps regulating their nervous systems in a not so great way, be prepared to do it yourself.
Right.
And because that opens up the conversation about like, are you okay? How are we doing this together? How are we doing this in our family dynamic? How are we doing this in our friendship?
Mm,
How are all these things showing up? And maybe it's about other things. Maybe it's about shopping. Maybe it's about food. Maybe it's about always needing to be right. There are
mm.
behavioral things that are super powerful when it comes to this that can definitely hurt people. And I think that we all need to be aware of. So if it's just like, hey, Talia, you and your beer habit, I'm going to tell
Right.
you, it's like, I need to tell you about what I do with shopping sometimes. I need to tell you about
Mm.
my relationship with sugar. I need to tell you about whatever. And then it's us.
I love this because you've actually demonstrated in real time for me personally what it is that I can look at because I actually don't drink. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I have very minimal sugar. I've been pretty like hardcore with all that stuff for a really long time. But then through what you just said, it's like, okay, but that's working its way out somewhere else. There are probably areas in my life that I can look at where because I'm a human being, right?
Exactly.
So where does that show up for me? And then, yeah, having that kind of conversation with somebody else, it's really good for me to understand, where does that still show up for me in a different way? And I can promise you it probably does somewhere.
Yeah. And or maybe you are just a really great example of someone who is really in tune with yourself, who is able to, in that moment when you're feeling that edge, to go, oh, okay, what do I need right now? Do I need to rest? Do I need to set a boundary? Do I need a snack? Do I need whatever? As opposed to, I need a beer, or I need a coffee, or I need whatever. I need to get really angry about something. There are greater or lesser degrees of that, but the key thing is, how in tune are we with our needs and our real human needs, and are we meeting them in a way that is healthful and
Healthy.
nourishing and actually
Yeah.
solves the problem? Because if I need to set a boundary with you, but instead of doing that, I'm eating a piece of cake, well, I'm not setting the boundary. And that's what I
Wow.
actually need. I don't need a bunch of sugar and flour and whatever. We make these sort of substitutions. And I think when we can recognize those patterns in ourselves,
Yes.
it's not about making that edge, that thing go away.
What's the need?
What's the actual need?
This is so good. Thank you. Because that is something that I also wanted to talk about, which is setting boundaries and having difficult conversations with people. So, how did learning how to do those things help you in your journey towards sobriety?
Really, the difficult conversation for me was even before I got to it, because shame has a way of silencing us. It isn't so much how you have the conversation, it's whether you have the conversation. Are you willing to step into a room and say, I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I feel kind of out of control. I feel like I'm harming myself with this behavior. I feel like I don't understand this behavior. That's the hard part, literally raising your hand and saying, I think I have a problem and I need help figuring it out. Because needing help is perceived as being weak, or somehow we don't deserve help because it's this moral failing, especially when it comes to addictions. Well, it's your fault. You shouldn't have tried it.
Right.
Why did you even do that?
Yeah.
Because we live in a culture of victim blaming. So for me, it was resisting the shame and just doing it anyways. I'm a mother as well. So this wasn't just for me. I'm role modeling to this person that I'm raising what it looks like to ask for help. And to
Absolutely.
say that I'm not okay, and to tell the truth.
Yeah,
All these
yeah.
things that we tell our children to do. And so for me, it was a really powerful act of doing all of those things.
Beautiful. I love that so much. So, in the business world, you achieved a certain level of success, and I'm sure that must have given you a sense of your ability to persevere and get through challenges. How did facing and overcoming gray area drinking redefine that for you in terms of your personal strength and understanding yourself?
Yeah. Being an entrepreneur is a really hard thing to do. It just is. We live in a time where it's very glamorized, where you go and you pitch investors and you raise this money and you become a unicorn and you disrupt things and you get on Dragon's Den and like.
I love become a unicorn. I'm sorry, I'm laughing so hard at that.
I know,
Yes.
I know. But this is what's kind of,
I
this
get
is
it.
the glamorous version
Yeah.
of it. Whereas in fact, being an entrepreneur is an endless series of solving problems.
Yes.
Okay. So you'd better feel really excited about what you are trying to achieve, your mission. For me, it was all about achieving the mission and all about helping people have better periods. And it definitely inculcates in you persistence. Like people say, what's your number one tip for entrepreneurs? I'm like, persistence. It's this super not sexy thing, but
Yeah.
it's really important to bring it into the picture with sobriety. I tried to quit drinking many, many, many times, and I was wrestling with it and struggling, and also struggled many times in business too. And just staying in it.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a journey. And that's the other thing that was really important to me. And I write about this in my book, is this notion, the archetype of the hero's journey. You don't just slay the dragon and then you're done. Like you've got to go back in the case of addiction and look at, what was it that I actually needed? What is it that I need now? And what am I actually going to do in this moment to meet my needs in a healthy way? And just seeing ourselves as humans. I often say we're all just a bunch of scared animals clinging to a gigantic rock that's hurtling through space at 167,000 kilometers an hour. So is it any wonder that we don't always get it right?
Yeah. Perseverance, persistence.
That's right.
Okay.
And that's resilience, right?
Yes.
That's the thing, is like you keep showing up and you keep showing up.
So how did this affect your relationships with other people?
The quitting drinking. Yeah, it totally did. I think what drinking did for me was made me less of myself. And there have been some casualties.
Got it. Yeah.
And so relationships, I think, where I was numbing myself out in terms of speaking my truth about where I was actually at with that person, especially if I would habitually drink with that person, I'm like, I'm out. I was not the same person. I was not taking myself offline or just making the same kind of excuses for certain types of behavior that I was like.
Yeah.
So when I stopped doing that, it just changed. And I realized that I had been muffling or silencing myself.
Not being authentic. You often hear people say, I have a couple of drinks so I can be myself.
Yeah. Everybody's different. But the idea that you need a substance that literally changes what's happening in your brain, you are by definition less yourself, but that can be a hard place to be in.
Got it.
And like, I understand it. I would say I have a lot of compassion for it. I don't believe that there's a right or a wrong way, but to just be aware of it. And also, what are you trading off? Because the way alcohol works in the brain is it attacks most of the brain, but especially the prefrontal cortex. And so that is our grown up in our mind. So it's our morality, our judgment. And it's why when we consume alcohol, sometimes we do really stupid things. Because your brain, your amygdala, which is your more primal, like survival driven, the next 2 seconds as opposed to future thinking. You know, nobody thinks it's a good idea to get into a bar fight. Nobody thinks it's a good idea to have unprotected sexual activity. But that's what alcohol does. And so I think you need to ask yourself, what are we risking here for our behavior and our authenticity? Yeah.
These are important questions. You mentioned that there were some casualties in terms of relationships. Did you find that there was also the flip side of that, where you had deeper relationships with people? Yay, yes. I love that.
And well, I would say, I would even go so far as to say that my ability to experience pleasure has been enhanced. So like this notion of the edge, we think, it's this kind of painful, uncomfortable thing. I just need that to go away. And then I'll relax, and then I'll feel good, and I'll chill out, But the problem with doing that is we also decrease our ability to experience pleasure.
Got it.
Right?
Yes.
So when we blur the edges, we're kind of blurring the whole thing. Yes. And just even the fact that I can remember when I've had a good time, an amazing conversation, I can remember it better because I wasn't drinking. Just my capacity for joy.
I love that.
It's huge. It is epic.
I love that. Beautiful. That's everything, right?
It is. Well, you literally feel it all. And first that can feel scary and overwhelming. And it's like, I don't want to feel it all. There's too much. But I'm able to process it more quickly as well. And so I'm happier to have that hard conversation.
Yeah.
And deal with it.
Because
alcohol blurs it temporarily.
Yes.
And you are not dealing with it, and then it's going to come back around, but with a hangover.
Yes, tenfold, because you're just pushing whatever that is down. The bigger question behind all of this, on a more macro scale, what is it that you feel people are avoiding dealing with?
You know, I mean, just the pain of life, like just existence, just being human,
which is hard. Yeah.
Well, like I said, that goes back to the clinging on to the planet that's going faster than you can imagine. There's this existential uncertainty. I think anybody living in the world, especially right now, who doesn't feel scared, uncertain, pick up a newspaper. This is real, regardless of what level of social privilege. Our planet, our climate is at stake. So be weird if you're like, I'm good, I'm 100% good. No. There are external sources of stress that every single human is going to feel. Yes. And so how do I soothe myself? We don't really explicitly teach those things. to one another, or if we're lucky, those are modeled by our parents or people that we're close to. And even growing up feeling ashamed in certain ways of who I was, or that I didn't have the right to ask for help, or that there was something wrong with me. Like, I think we all believe that. We're not good enough. I don't fit in. Just these really core wounds that we pick up in different ways. And then we're not necessarily equipped with the tools, the language to go, I'm struggling with this right now and I need help. And can you help me? We're not taught to do that.
Yeah. Although I do hope it's changing with the younger generations, that we're starting to encourage them to understand that who we are is perfect, whole, and complete. And then operating from that standpoint is so different than saying, I'm broken.
I do think, as an example of the way that things are getting better, nowadays, the conversation around mental health, for example, and especially for youth, to be able to say, I've got some anxiety coming up, or I'm feeling depressed, or I'm maybe having some really, really negative self-talk, or I'm having trouble paying attention. Youth are so much more literate in that, and we collectively are so much more literate in having those conversations about mental health and that being safe and normal. And that is my current aspiration, to normalize the conversation about addiction and recovery and sobriety in the same way, and menopause.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so like, I'm always throwing in that I'm postmenopausal and I like purple and I am
love
in
it.
recovery. I used to have a
Yes.
drinking problem and now I'm in recovery and I'm super happy and I love gardening. You know,
Yeah.
of these normal
Yes.
things that I want you to know about me.
Yeah.
And I love doing that.
For anyone who's listening who might think that drinking is in their life, but they don't think it's that bad, but they do feel that it's affecting them somehow, what advice do you have for them?
Just pay attention. Pay attention when something becomes daily. Pay attention when you pour yourself a little bit more. Pay attention when you feel kind of, or you wake up in the middle of the night. Like, all of these things have a cost, and just stay in dialogue. Or maybe the better question too is, what am I doing when I'm drinking? Is there something else I could be doing that would actually serve me better? Do I need to up my blood sugar? Do I need a rest? Do I need to set a boundary? Do I need to say no to something? I don't know, but
Whatever
find
that
out what
is.
it is and interrogate that feeling, what I call the edge, before you automatically default to that behavior. Because your body doesn't want alcohol. Your body rejects alcohol. It's poison. Like, there's no such thing as a quote unquote normal drinker. We have to train ourselves to ingest this substance. There's literally nothing good about it.
What is it that I need? That's so simple. That might open up something that's not so simple, but just the act of that question.
But then you get to deal
really
with
simple.
it, right?
Exactly.
And then it doesn't keep showing up and showing up and
Yeah.
showing up. It's like, I'm done with this thing.
Yeah. Are there any organizations or support groups that helped you through your journey, or that you recommend people reach out to?
There's so many now. Even in the 10 years that I started looking, I really thought my only option was to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't like the idea of having to, just that there were personal defects of character. It's like, no. This is not a defect of character. This is a defect of society. I am, what did you just say?
Perfect, whole, and complete. Yeah.
I'm perfect, whole, and complete. And I'm just misdirecting some of my needs and meeting them in unhealthy ways with alcohol. There's so many good meetings. I loved something called the Luckiest Club, or TLC.
Okay.
I've heard really, really good things about Recovery Elevator as well. I've read so many books. My favorite book is called Quit Like a Woman. The Radical Choice to Not Drink in a Culture Obsessed with Alcohol by Holly Whitaker. It was a meeting of the Luckiest Club. That was my day one of sobriety. I went to this online meeting and there was a woman there speaking and her name was Hope.
Wow.
And it was her 1 year sobriety. And she was talking to the group and she told her story. And I wanted to be her so badly. Talia, she was like a human North Star. And it was like, I'm going there no matter what. And like, her story was so much harder than mine in so many ways, just what she went through as a child. And there she was, this shining star of sobriety. And we were all there celebrating her. And I just thought, it has to be now.
Wow. Yeah.
And I
Beautiful.
never drank again. And that was 3.5 years ago.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sharing our stories is so incredibly important.
Yeah,
You just
it is.
spoke to that, and you're doing the same now. And that's why I'm doing this podcast, is because I really want to honor ourselves and each other for what we're going through in life. And it's important to support each other along the way.
Well, your work is amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I like to ask guests to share about 3 different types of victory stories. What's an example of a small daily victory for you?
I'd have to say sobriety at this point, because it literally is foundational. I wasn't able to fully function in my life until I quit drinking. Yeah, I wake up every morning and I'm like, oh my God, I feel amazing.
And just the joy in your face, you can tell. It's beautiful and it's coming from within. So good. Congratulations. That's amazing. A victory from a failure. Has there ever been something that you labeled or experienced as a failure at first, but later were able to see that it was actually a victory?
Yeah, I love that question. And so it's not exactly a failure, but why did I start making reusable menstrual products? Let me tell you. When I was a kid, and so age 11-ish, I was so excited about the idea of becoming an adult woman. I had a fantasy that when I started my period, I would be welcomed into this community initiated by a group of adult women. But when I actually started my period, it was not awesome. And it was nothing like I had imagined it. And it was super painful. And there was no celebration. And it was just this thing that happened one day. But that feeling of anticipation of something special and amazing, and then the feeling of disappointment never really left me. And they say that who we are in many ways and how we live our lives is informed by unresolved childhood issues. And for me, that's one of them. And so you can read pretty much my entire career with Luna pads. And then also in an event series I created starting in around 2014 called G-Day. As a response to that, it was like it gave me what I wanted to have and what I knew was there for me, and that it wasn't just some silly childhood dream, and that it was a real feeling, and that having a menstrual cycle was a powerful thing that mattered, and that people who menstruate do deserve respect and this should be celebrated and recognized. And so it was that wound, I would say, that inspired me to create those things.
I love that so much because that also works really beautifully into the next one, which is your rainbow story. And I can already see connections there. Your rainbow story being your overall life storyline. It starts with a major adversity. It works its way through the different colors of the rainbow and of life. And then it connects you to your pot of gold, which is your life's purpose. Do you know what that is? Are you clear on that and what your purpose is?
Well, I think it definitely has something to do with resisting shame. So in the sense that I took a stand for menstruation and normalizing that conversation and saying, this is nothing to be ashamed of. This is something that matters, and people deserve dignity and respect and support. And now I'm doing the same thing with sobriety and with menopause. And so I think it's about basically dismantling shame and helping people feel more comfortable in just being able to talk to each other about these things. Why was it so hard for me to talk to people about what I was scared about with alcohol? Why was I, as a teenager, like I would never, ever let anybody know I had my period? And so I'd say if I had to pick one word, it's about liberation.
Yes.
For me. And especially in these artificial constraints, life is hard enough. Why do we do this to ourselves?
Yes.
Like people do it around sexuality, around mental health, like so many diseases that we're just kind of like freaked out about. It's like, go there.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love that. Are you ready for a quick round of questions?
I can try.
When do you feel the most seen for who you truly are?
Oh my gosh. When I'm in conversation with people, just having meaningful dialogue and exchange and moments, and even with strangers, even the word stranger is so weird. I love the idea that they're a friend that you haven't met yet.
Oh,
And
I love that.
yeah, me
Yes.
too. It's really powerful. And yeah, when I'm
Mm,
just in heartfelt, honest, truthful dialogue with others.
beautiful.
Yeah.
How do you honor yourself every day?
I actually start the day by drinking a glass of water. Water is sacred, and it just supports my body, nourishing it in this really, really, really basic way. And I also honor myself, I would say, with like, I'm really interested in fashion, and I just choose colors that give me pleasure and wild footwear. Yeah, it's this self-adornment thing.
Beautiful. I love
Yeah.
that. What's your favorite way to celebrate?
Just getting really excited, just letting myself feel that way. And I can do it on my own or I can do it with others. I love food. I love cooking. That's a huge one for me. That was a hard one to disentangle from drinking.
Got it.
And there's beautiful non-alcoholic wine. Shout out to my friends at Sensorium.
Is there a piece of jewelry that you have or an accessory that has particular meaning for you? And if so, why?
This was made by my friend Sonia Picard. It's a swallow. And then it's got a pearl from this very old pearl necklace of my mother's
Oh,
and a couple of
beautiful.
opals. So when I was first getting sober, you talk about self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
I saw myself as a baby bird.
Mm.
It's vulnerable and it's not strong and it's just kind of this cute thing, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of clueless and it's like in the world going, oh my God, look at all these things. And when you're newly sober, it's kind of like that. It's like colors seem brighter and this tastes so good. I feel so
Right.
amazing, like incredible joy to it. And so the swallow also represents freedom, liberation, because of course it can fly. And there is no other necklace like this in the entire world. It just has a nice feeling of commitment and permanence to it. Like this is the bedrock, like my sobriety, my freedom, my creativity, my family. All of those things are the bedrock of who I am as a person.
Gorgeous. Thank you. That was just truly beautiful. Being able to experience life in all of its vibrancy, to enjoy pleasure in a way that you never did before. I'm so happy for you.
Oh, thanks,
Yeah.
Talia. I love the frames, like these different kinds of victories, your questions and the way you hold space and you're listening. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Last one. How do you define a triumph for yourself?
I guess when something's been challenging, like when you've put some work into something. I talked a little bit earlier about this whole idea of disruption and bigger, faster, more. That's not a win for me. A win is just connecting with the natural cycles of life, move gracefully and nurture things.
Love it.
If I can get up in the morning and drink my water and be sober and love the people around me and help someone in any way feel better about themselves and have taken care of the planet, it's not a huge thing, but it's what I aspire to be as a person.
Wonderful. So beautifully said. Madeleine, this conversation has been incredible. I thank you so much for your courage in being vulnerable, and I commend you for your commitment to supporting people on their journeys in their well-being. It's been very educational and just really touching on many levels. I really want to thank you for today's conversation. It means a lot.
Right back at you, friend. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm just really, really grateful for you and the work that you do and your spirit. And just getting to connect with you today has been joyful.